In the southwest of Ecuador, tucked within a rugged landscape, lies a place that has puzzled scientists and storytellers alike. It is called Tenky Loma, and at first glance it appears to be just another fossil site, one of many scattered across South America. But as paleontologists soon realized, this ground hides one of the strangest and most unsettling mass graves in prehistory. For within its layers are the bones of giants, thousands upon thousands of them, all belonging to a single kind of creature, the giant ground sloth. These sloths were not the sleepy, gentle tree huggers of today. No, their extinct cousins were titans, immense herbivores that roamed the Americas in vast herds. The species most commonly found at Tenky Loma, Aramotherium, was an animal that could put even modern elephants to shame. Imagine a beast weighing nearly 5 tons, stretching 6 meters from nose to tail, and towering 3 times higher than a human when it reared on its hind legs. Its skeleton was so dense and robust that it seemed built to endure anything the natural world could throw at it. These creatures were slow, yes, but they were also formidable, their claws like curved scythes, their bulk a living fortress. And yet, here, in Tenky Loma, nearly 24 of these behemoths died together, suddenly, mysteriously, within the same window of time, some 18,000 to 23,000 years ago. To stumble upon such a sight is eerie enough. Massive bones jumbled and strewn, the echoes of a herd brought down in unison. But the question gnawed at every scientist who saw it. What could possibly have killed them? At first, the answer seemed obvious. The fossil bed contained traces of asphalt, reminding researchers of the famous Brea Tar Pits in Los Angeles. Perhaps the sloths, lured to the marshy area, had stumbled into pools of sticky death, their huge frames trapped and slowly entombed in black tar. It was a neat, almost cinematic explanation. But nature is rarely so simple. The deeper they dug, the more inconsistencies appeared. Unlike La Brea, where bones are fully submerged and coated, the remains at Tenky Loma bore only partial traces of tar. It didn't add up. The real truth revealed itself in a far stranger form. As researchers excavated further, they found something that seemed almost laughable if it weren't so macabre. Surrounding the sloth bones was an entire layer of compacted plant matter, chewed, digested, unmistakably processed. In plain words, fossilized feces. Tons of it. Enough to blanket the site like a grotesque quilt. It wasn't just a hint, it was the smoking gun. The sloths had not been swallowed by tar, they had been undone by themselves. Here's how the tragic tale likely unfolded. Thousands of years ago, a drought swept across this part of Ecuador, forcing herds of sloths into shrinking pools of water. At first, these oases must have seemed like salvation, food to eat, water to drink, safety in numbers. But as the giants gathered, they also relieved themselves in the same shallow pools. Slowly, day after day, their waste accumulated until the oasis turned into something far more sinister, a toxic swamp of their own making. Bacteria bloomed, parasites spread. The water became poisoned, yet the sloths, thirsty and desperate, had no choice but to keep drinking. Some waded, some wallowed, all of them consumed by an invisible, creeping sickness. In the end, the mighty ground sloths of Tenky Loma died not by predator's claw or nature's storm, but by the slow, humiliating hand of infection, collapsing beside one another in their poisoned refuge. It sounds unbelievable. Creatures so massive felled by something so undignified. But history offers chilling parallels. In the 1970s, biologists in Tanzania watched as a drought drove a herd of 140 hippos into a shallow pool. Within weeks, the water became a foul, stagnant pit. The hippos fouled their own refuge, and disease swept through. Over 100 hippos died, their hulking bodies floating in the very water they had once relied on. Nature doesn't need predators to kill. It can turn an animal's own habits into a weapon. Picture for a moment how this might have appeared to ancient peoples. For millennia, humans shared landscapes with giant sloths. Early hunter-gatherers would have seen them as both rivals and resources. Imagine stumbling upon Tenky Loma in those days, seeing carcasses piled upon carcasses, a smell so putrid that it would drive away all but the vultures. To human eyes, it may have seemed like divine punishment, a cautionary tale written in rotting flesh. Such places no doubt left deep impressions in oral traditions long since lost. And perhaps that is the strangest part of all. These were animals built like tanks, towering colossi of the Ice Age. Yet even they could be undone, not by violence, not by catastrophe, but by their own waste. It is at once tragic and absurd, an ending that feels almost like dark comedy written by the earth itself. But if Tenky Loma teaches us anything, it is that survival has never been guaranteed, not for the giants of the past, and not for us. And as bizarre as this graveyard is, it is far from the only tale of strange deaths preserved in stone. For not all tragedies are so slow, nor so messy. Some are quick, cruel, and even stranger still. Which brings us next to a story that begins not with giants, but with something much smaller, frogs, and their end was not born of thirst nor disease, but of love itself. From colossal sloths brought down by their own poisoned waterholes, we turn now to something far humbler, frogs. They may be small, but their story is no less tragic or bizarre. In the Geiseltal region of Germany, paleontologists unearthed a mass grave unlike any other. Here, preserved within layers of ancient swamp sediments dating back 45 million years, lay the fossilized remains of hundreds of frogs. They weren't just scattered bones. Many of these amphibians were nearly complete, their skeletons delicate but intact, as if time itself had paused at the moment of their demise. But what killed them? That was the question that baffled researchers for decades. There were no marks of predation, no evidence of disease. The frogs weren't elderly or weak. They had been healthy at the time of death. Yet here they were, stacked together in sedimentary silence, a chorus of voices forever silenced. At first, scientists proposed the simplest explanation. Perhaps the swamp dried up too quickly, leaving them stranded. But this theory soon fell apart. The Geiseltal swamp was part of a vast, water-rich ecosystem. Even if one pond vanished, the frogs could have easily hopped to another. So why had so many perished together? For years, the mystery seemed unsolvable, a riddle locked in stone. The breakthrough came not from fossils, but from studying the living. Biologists observing modern frogs noticed something both fascinating and disturbing. Mating season can be deadly. In certain species, breeding is a frenzy compressed into just a few days or weeks. Dozens of males swarm a single female, competing, grappling, sometimes piling on top of one another in what scientists call amplexus, a mating embrace. For the female, this can be fatal. Pushed under the water by relentless suitors, she may drown before the act is complete. Even males, exhausted and weak, sometimes succumb. Suddenly, the fossils in Germany made sense. These frogs had not died of drought or famine. They had died of love, or rather, of love's excess. It is an almost tragic irony. The very act meant to continue life had instead brought death. Imagine the Geiseltal swamp in breeding season. Hundreds of frogs, their calls rising in a deafening chorus, bodies thrashing in shallow water, a ritual as old as time. And then silence, as the frenzy turned fatal. Layer upon layer of their bodies sank into the muck, eventually preserved as fossils. To us, frogs may seem like humble creatures, but throughout human history, they have carried deep symbolic weight. In ancient Egypt, the frog was linked to fertility and rebirth, associated with the goddess Heket, who presided over childbirth. In Chinese tradition, the frog was a symbol of prosperity and yin energy. Even in European folklore, frogs appeared in transformation tales, from witches' familiars to princes hidden by enchantment. To find their fossilized remains en masse, victims of their own mating ritual, feels like nature itself writing a dark parable. And while their ancient tragedy is frozen in stone, frogs today are no less vulnerable. Across the world, amphibians are collapsing under the weight of a modern plague. Chytridiomycosis, a fungal disease that eats away at their skin, disrupting their ability to breathe and absorb water. Entire species vanish within decades. In Ecuador alone, the very same land where the sloths met their grim fate, over 170 frog species have disappeared, some wiped out before scientists even had the chance to name them. It is sobering to realize that the same creatures who died in joyful chaos millions of years ago now face annihilation at our hands. Through habitat loss, pollution, and the spread of pathogens. The story of the Geiseltal frogs, then, is not just an ancient curiosity. It is a mirror reflecting the fragility of life across time. And yet the fossils remind us that fragility does not mean weakness. These frogs, though victims of their own biology, were also survivors, their lineage enduring through extinctions, ice ages, and upheavals. Their tragedy is part of the larger tapestry of life, messy, brutal, and strangely poetic. Death by love may sound absurd, even darkly humorous, but compared to some other fates in the fossil record, it is mercifully quick. A struggle, a breath cut short, and silence. For other creatures, death came slower, sharper, and sometimes at the most unexpected hands. Which brings us next to a flying reptile who met its end not in battle with another beast, nor in the jaws of a predator, but in collision with something we seldom think of as dangerous, a plant.
Some deaths preserved in stone are almost too strange to believe. Take, for example, the fate of a prehistoric flyer whose end came not from predator or plague, but from a plant. In the warm skies of early Cretaceous Brazil soared a pterosaur called Loudatodactylus. To the untrained eye, it resembled the classic toy store image of a pterodactyl, a long, slender beak lined with sharp teeth, wings stretched like canvas across its arms, and a wingspan of nearly 4 meters. It was a hunter of fish and small prey, a ruler of the air in a world teeming with dinosaurs. Yet when paleontologists discovered its fossil, they immediately knew something was wrong. Wedged through its jaw was not the skeleton of prey, but a leaf. Not just any leaf, but that of a yucca plant, the kind still found today in deserts and drylands, infamous for its rigid dagger-like blades. Locals call them names like Adam's needle or Spanish bayonet for obvious reasons. The leaf had pierced the pterosaur's lower jaw like a spear, lodging itself deep into bone. At first glance, one might think the animal tried to eat it, mistaking it for prey, but Loudatodactylus was no vegetarian. Its teeth were built for gripping fish, not slicing leaves. The far more chilling explanation is that it collided with the yucca mid-flight, the way a bird today might smash into a thorn bush. For this unlucky pterosaur, the encounter was catastrophic. With a gaping wound through its mouth, it could no longer eat, no longer drink. Infection would have set in, every attempt to dislodge the green spear only deepening its misery. In time, it weakened, starved, and fell, dying not in battle, but in agony, brought down by a plant's accidental strike. This single fossil is the only known case of death by leaf in the prehistoric record, yet it reminds us that in nature, even plants can kill. And in fact, plants have claimed other victims. At the Tanis fossil site in North Dakota, a place unlike any other, the remains of a turtle were found impaled by a tree. To understand the weight of this discovery, you must first understand what Tanis is. Imagine a time capsule of apocalypse. Tanis preserves the very day, 66 million years ago, when the asteroid struck Earth and ended the reign of the dinosaurs. Here, the sediment is frozen in chaos. Fish with molten glass in their gills, ants buried alive with impact debris, dinosaurs and mammals swept into heaps by inland tsunamis. It is one of the only places where we can see death as it happened, not millions of years later, but in the very hours after disaster. And among this chaos was that turtle, its shell skewered by a tree. How could such a thing occur? Paleontologists believe that when the asteroid hit, seismic waves and monstrous floods ripped through North America. Trees were hurled like missiles, smashing into animals already struggling to survive. One such projectile found its mark on a turtle, pinning it like a specimen on a collector's board. There is something haunting about these deaths. A pterosaur struck down by a leaf, a turtle impaled by a tree, nature turning into its own executioner. We often imagine predators as the great killers of the past, saber-toothed cats, tyrannosaurs, monstrous crocodiles, but sometimes the deadliest blows came from places no one expected. And the Tanis site offers more than isolated tragedies. It reveals how fragile life was, even far from ground zero. Tanis lies nearly 3,000 kilometers from the impact crater in Mexico, roughly the distance from Cairo to Paris. Yet even there, death was inescapable. Shockwaves, wildfires, choking ash, and raining glass turned rivers into traps, forests into graveyards. To live on that day was to fight a losing battle against the planet itself. If there is a common thread between these tales, it is that death often arrives sideways, from angles no creature can predict. A yucca leaf in the wrong place, a tree flung by a wave. The world itself can be as merciless as any predator. But as brutal as these plant strikes were, they pale before another kind of death, one born of fire, ash, and the fury of volcanoes. For in another corner of the world, entire creatures were not impaled, but incinerated, preserved in the ashes of eruptions that rival even the asteroid itself.
If the asteroid at Tanis showed how the sky could kill, then the fossil fields of Nebraska remind us that the Earth itself can be just as merciless. Here lies a site called Ashfall Fossil Beds, sometimes called America's Pompeii. At first glance, it looks like a tranquil meadow today, but 12 million years ago, it was a death trap. Beneath the soil lies a blanket of volcanic ash, meters thick, covering the skeletons of entire herds, animals frozen mid-stride, as if they simply lay down and never rose again. The cast of victims is astonishing. Ancient camels with long, slender legs, tiny three-toed horses no larger than a pony, turtles, birds, and antelopes, and most haunting of all, rhinos. Dozens of them, whole families, mothers beside calves, clustered together in the positions they fell. At first, paleontologists thought the ash fall was sudden, perhaps killing them in a single choking day, much like the eruption of Mount Vesuvius did to the citizens of Pompeii. But careful excavation told a slower, crueler story. The ash came from a supervolcano in what is now Idaho, erupting with a force 1,000 times greater than Mount St. Helens. Winds carried the ash beastward, blanketing Nebraska in a fine, glassy powder. At first, the animals may have thought little of it. A haze in the air, grit in the grass, they kept grazing. But day after day, the ash fell, sifting into lungs, coating the landscape like a poisoned snow. The victims didn't die all at once. The skeletons show signs of prolonged agony, fine fractures in the ribs, stress marks from violent coughing, teeth worn down from chewing gritty, ash-coated plants. Many skeletons are found with heads lowered to the ground, as if gasping for breath.
It may have taken weeks for the herds to succumb, one by one, collapsing beside each other until silence settled over the plains. The ash preserved them so perfectly that even stomach contents remained intact. Paleontologists can see what the rhinos ate in their final days. Grasses turned gray with volcanic dust. It is as if time itself pressed pause, leaving behind not just bones, but a final snapshot of life snuffed out. Standing in the asphalt dig site today is overwhelming. Skeleton after skeleton lies in plain view, as if the herd simply lay down and never rose again. It is a graveyard without predators, without scavengers, because even they could not survive the poisoned world. The parallels to Pompeii are eerie. Just as Roman citizens were preserved mid-step, some even shielding children as volcanic ash engulfed them, these rhinos were locked into their final moments, the earth itself sculpting a memorial in silence. But unlike Pompeii, there were no survivors to tell the tale. Only the bones remain, whispering across millions of years. What makes ashfall so unsettling is not just the scale of death, but its intimacy. These were not faceless animals lost in abstraction. Here are mothers beside calves, herds clustered together, creatures who lived and breathed and suffered in ways eerily familiar. Their tragedy is not distant, it is heartbreakingly close. And yet, ashfall is not unique. All across the fossil record, volcanoes have played executioner. From Triassic forests entombed in lava flows to Miocene lakes turned toxic by ash. Time and again, the Earth has shown that life balances on a razor's edge, easily tipped into oblivion. But if volcanoes and asteroids show us the violence of sudden death, there are other fossils that capture something quieter, stranger. Moments of life interrupted not by chaos, but by sheer accident. For our next tale, we leave behind the herds and turn instead to individuals, creatures caught mid-meal, mid-stride, mid-battle, frozen forever in their final act.
Most mass graves in the fossil record tell stories of catastrophe, volcanoes, asteroids, droughts. But some fossils are more intimate, eerie in their precision. They don't just capture death, they capture the moment before, freezing living creatures mid-action, as though time itself were a cruel photographer. One of the most haunting comes from the deserts of Mongolia. Here, paleontologists uncovered two dinosaurs locked in eternal combat, a velociraptor and a protoceratops. The scene is startling. The raptor's sickle claw is buried deep into the ceratopsian's neck, while the protoceratops has bitten down hard on the predator's arm, its jaws clenched even in death. Neither escaped. A sudden sandstorm or collapsing dune must have buried them alive in mid-struggle, preserving their last desperate fight for 75 million years. It is not just a fossil, it is a frozen drama, violence immortalized in stone. Then there are fossils that capture life's quieter moments, moments that should have passed unnoticed if not for the accident of preservation. In Germany's Messel Pit, a site renowned for its exquisite fossils, researchers found a turtle couple locked in mating position. At first glance, the find seemed almost comical, but the truth was darker. These turtles had been mating in a lake rich in volcanic gases. Mid-embrace, they inhaled the toxic water and sank to the bottom where they were sealed in oil-rich sediments. For millions of years they remained entwined, their final act of reproduction turned into their tomb. Fish, too, appear in this gallery of frozen lives. In one fossil slab, a predator fish is caught mid-bite, jaws clamped around a smaller fish that it never finished swallowing. Both were likely suffocated in a sudden cloud of ash or sediment, locked together forever in their unfinished meal. The fossil almost feels like a dark joke, death by indigestion, preserved for eternity. Even insects, fragile as they are, sometimes meet this fate.
In pieces of amber, droplets of ancient resin hardened around flies and beetles mid-flight, spiders mid-hunt, ants mid-argument. Some of the most astonishing finds include insects mid-mating, their tiny bodies locked together, interrupted by a falling drop of resin. What was once a fleeting, private moment became immortal, displayed now in museum glass cases for human eyes to gawk at millions of years later. There is something unsettling about these fossils. They remind us not only that life is fragile, but also that death is indiscriminate. A predator can become prey in the blink of an eye. A lover can become a fossil before the act is even complete. Time does not care whether the story makes sense. It simply records what it finds. And yet, these frozen moments also give us something rare: connection. To see a velociraptor and a protoceratops locked in combat is to glimpse not just bones, but behavior, instinct, the very rhythm of prehistoric life. To see turtles entwined is to recognize patterns we still share. For a moment, the millions of years between us and them collapse. They were alive, they were struggling, they were mating, they were eating, and then they were gone. If the fossil record is a book, most of its pages are smudged and torn, words missing, chapters lost. But every so often, we turn a page and find a perfect snapshot, a scene caught mid-sentence, an image of life stolen from time. And as strange as these intimate deaths are, perhaps stranger still are the fossilized stories that blur the line between life and legend. Tales so bizarre that for centuries they were mistaken not for science, but for myth.